The Galactic Survey Corps thought Earth was a mild planet, until one human sneezed and cracked a reinforced wall. I need to be honest with you right from the start. My name is Vex Tauvorn, and I was an idiot. A complete, absolute, galaxy-class moron. But hey, in my defense, how was I supposed to know? I had been doing this job for 17 cycles, classifying planets, rating Deathworlds, and I had never, not once, gotten it wrong. Not once. My record was spotless, pristine, absolutely perfect. I worked for the Galactic Survey Corps, Planetary Classification Division, and my specialty was Deathworlds. You know, those horrible nightmare planets where everything wants to kill you? Yeah, those. I had seen them all. Volcanic hellscapes where the air itself was made of poison. Ice worlds where the cold could freeze your organs solid in 3 seconds flat. Jungle planets with predators so vicious they made our ancient war beasts look like cuddly pets. I had classified hundreds of them, maybe thousands, and I knew my stuff. I really did. Or at least I thought I did. The assessment hearing was scheduled for 3rd rotation, standard galactic time, in Conference Hall Epsilon on the station. I remember walking in there with my head held high, my classification datapad clutched in my upper left manipulator, feeling absolutely confident. The hall was massive, all sleek metal and glowing blue panels, with a semicircular table where the review board sat. Representatives from 40 different species filled the observation seats, all waiting to hear the official verdict on this new planet that had just joined the galactic community. Earth. That was the planet's name in the local language. Simple, short, kind of pretty actually. The humans had applied for trade status, and before we could approve them we needed to classify their homeworld. Standard procedure, nothing unusual, except, well, everything about this case was about to become very unusual, very quickly. I took my seat at the presentation podium, nodding to the board members. That was when my colleague, Krill, scuttled over. Krill was a Thexian, all chitinous plates and too many eyes, and normally he was the calm, rational one. Not today. Today he looked agitated, his antenna twitching nervously. "Vextau," he hissed, his voice translator making his words sound urgent and clipped. "We need to talk about your classification. I have reviewed the data, all of it, every single file. You have made a serious error." I blinked at him, confused. Error? What error? I spent weeks analyzing Earth. It is a Category 3 death world at most. Mild gravity, reasonable atmospheric pressure, stable orbit. It is practically a vacation destination. Krill's primary eyes widened in what I now recognize as horror, but at the time I just thought he was being dramatic. Mild? Mild? Vextauer, have you actually read the biological surveys? The geological reports? Earth should be classified as a Category 7 death world, minimum, maybe even Category 8. I actually laughed, out loud, right there in front of the review board. Several of them looked up from their datapads, curious about the commotion. "Category 7? I said, still chuckling. "Kirill, my friend, I think you have been working too hard. Earth is fine. Sure, it has some weather patterns, some tectonic activity, a few large predators, but nothing extraordinary. The humans seem perfectly normal, fragile even. Have you seen their physiology reports? No natural armor, no venomous glands, no built-in weapons. They are soft, squishy and weak. Category 3, maybe Category 4 if we are being extremely cautious, but Category 7, that is absurd." Krill made a sound that his translator could not quite process, something between a groan and a warning cry. "You are not listening. The humans are not the problem, Earth itself is the problem. Do you have any idea what they survive on a daily basis? The gravity alone would crush most species. The atmospheric oxygen content is borderline toxic. The microorganisms, the radiation exposure, the temperature fluctuation." "Krill," I interrupted, waving my manipulator dismissively. "I appreciate your concern, truly I do, but I am the senior specialist here. I have classified 473 planets in my career. Not once have I been wrong. Not once. Earth is mild. The humans are harmless. This assessment is practically a formality." He stared at me for a long moment. All 8 of his eyes focused on me with an intensity that should have been my first warning. "You are making a catastrophic mistake." "Noted and logged," I said cheerfully, turning back to the review board. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have a presentation to deliver." Krill retreated to his seat, muttering things in his native language that the translator mercifully did not process. I powered up my presentation display, feeling smug and satisfied. Another perfect classification. Another flawless addition to my record. This was going to be easy. Oh, how wrong I was. How spectacularly, horrifyingly, wall-crackingly wrong I was. I was 3 slides into my presentation, explaining the atmospheric composition of Earth and how remarkably unremarkable it was, when the doors to Conference Hall Epsilon slid open with a soft hiss. Every head, antenna and sensory organ in the room turned toward the entrance. The human liaison officer had arrived. His name was Jackson Torres, according to the identification beacon that pinged my datapad. He walked in with an easy, relaxed stride, and I have to tell you, my first thought was, this is what everyone is worried about. Jackson Torres was, by all observable metrics, completely and utterly average. Medium height, maybe 1.7 meters tall, give or take. Medium build, not particularly muscular, not particularly thin. Brown skin, dark hair cut short, brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He wore the standard diplomatic uniform, navy blue with some kind of insignia on the shoulder, and he carried a small briefcase that probably contained his credentials and paperwork. He looked harmless. No, worse than harmless. He looked boring, like the kind of being you would pass in a corridor and immediately forget about. There was nothing threatening about him whatsoever. No fangs, no claws, no visible weapons, no intimidating posture, just a regular guy doing his regular job. I caught Krill's eye across the room. He was staring at Jackson with the kind of intensity usually reserved for active explosive devices. His antennae were flat against his head, which in Phexian body language meant extreme anxiety. I rolled my eyes, or at least I performed the equivalent gesture with my ocular stalks. Krill was being ridiculous. "Good morning, everyone," Jackson said, his voice warm and friendly. The translator rendered it in perfectly pleasant standard galactic with just a hint of an accent that suggested his neural implant was recent. "I apologize for the delay. Transportation took longer than expected. You know how station traffic can be." Several board members made polite acknowledgement sounds. Jackson smiled wider, and I noticed he had very white teeth, flat teeth, no points, designed for grinding plant matter probably. Another sign of a non-threatening species, herbivore teeth, harmless. He made his way to the designated human seating area, nodding politely to various attendees as he passed. His movements were smooth and controlled, nothing unusual. He sat down carefully, placing his briefcase on the floor beside him, and then looked up at me with an apologetic expression. "Please continue," he said, gesturing toward my presentation display. "Do not let me interrupt. I am just here to observe and answer any questions the board might have about Earth or human culture." "Thank you," I said, trying to inject professional courtesy into my tone even though internally I was thinking, this is the dangerous Deathworlder, this polite, soft-spoken diplomat. I was just explaining to the board why Earth qualifies as a Category 3 Deathworld, which is actually quite a favorable rating. It means your planet is hospitable to most galactic species with only minor environmental adaptations required. Jackson nodded along, still smiling. "That sounds reasonable." I continued my presentation, clicking through slides about Earth's temperature ranges, which I noted were quite moderate. Precipitation patterns, mostly predictable. Geological stability, generally good with some minor fault lines. I was really hitting my stride, building my case beautifully. The board members were nodding, taking notes, and I could feel my perfect record remaining intact. Then Jackson sniffled. It was a small sound, barely noticeable, but in the quiet conference hall it carried. He raised his hand slightly, apologetic again. "Excuse me, sorry, I should mention. I am dealing with a slight cold. Nothing serious, just a minor respiratory infection, very common for humans, happens all the time. I apologize in advance if I sniffle or cough during the proceedings. I will try to be as quiet as possible." A cold, a respiratory infection. I waved my manipulator dismissively. "That is quite all right, Officer Torres. We all deal with minor illnesses from time to time. Please do not worry about it." What I was actually thinking was, see, they get sick from their own planet's microorganisms, weak immune systems. Further proof of Category 3 classification. Krill made that untranslatable sound again, louder this time. I ignored him. Jackson pulled out a small cloth from his pocket, what humans apparently call a tissue, and dabbed at his nose. "Thank you for understanding. It should not be a problem. Although, fair warning, I might need to sneeze at some point. I will try to give you all advance notice if I feel one coming on." "Perfectly fine," I assured him, turning back to my presentation. "Now, As I was saying, Earth's biodiversity, while impressive in quantity, does not present significant danger to most galactic species. Yes, there are large predators, but they are easily avoided with standard precautions. Yes, there are venomous creatures, but they are localized to specific regions. The humans themselves have thrived on this planet for thousands of cycles with relatively primitive technology for most of their history, which should tell you everything you need to know about how mild the environmental challenges actually are. I was so pleased with that argument, so proud of my logical reasoning. The board members were nodding again. My classification was going to be approved. My record would remain perfect. Jackson Torres sat quietly in his seat, listening politely, occasionally dabbing his nose with his tissue. Harmless, completely and totally harmless. I wish I could go back in time and slap myself hard, multiple times. I was on slide 17 discussing Earth's ocean ecosystems and explaining how the marine life posed minimal threat to spacefaring visitors when Jackson Torres raised his hand again. Excuse me, he said, his voice slightly strained. Sorry to interrupt, but I think I am about to sneeze. Just wanted to give everyone a heads up. I barely glanced at him. Yes, that is fine. As I was saying, the aquatic predators, while large, are confined to specific depths and— No, seriously, Jackson interrupted, standing up now. His face had gone slightly red, and he was pressing the tissue against his nose. I really need to sneeze. Like right now. You might want— Officer Torres, please, I said, a bit more sharply than I intended. I was in the middle of my presentation, my rhythm was perfect, and I did not appreciate the disruption. I understand you are unwell, but a simple sneeze is hardly cause for alarm. Now, if we could return our attention to the data. That was when it happened. Jackson Torres sneezed. Let me be absolutely clear about something. I had heard sneezes before. Many species expel air forcefully when their respiratory systems are irritated. It is a common biological response across the galaxy. Small puff of air, maybe a little spray, usually over in half a second, mildly unpleasant but ultimately harmless. What came out of Jackson Torres was not a sneeze. It was a natural disaster. It was a weapon. It was the sound of a small warship exploding, crossed with a thunderstorm, crossed with some kind of ancient predator's roar. The noise alone was catastrophic. My auditory membranes nearly ruptured from the sheer volume. It was not a polite achoo or even a vigorous hashoo. It was more like hashoo, drawn out and impossibly loud, echoing off every surface in the conference hall. I swear the floor vibrated, the lights flickered. My datapad actually fell out of my manipulator from the shock. But the noise was just the beginning. The shockwave was visible, actually visible. The air itself rippled outward from Jackson Torres like he had detonated a small explosive device inside his face. The wave of pressurized air expanded in all directions, and I watched, frozen in absolute horror, as it hit the reinforced titanium composite wall behind him. The wall cracked. Not a small crack, not a hairline fracture, a massive jagged split that ran from floor to ceiling, spiderwebbing outward in multiple directions. Chunks of the composite material actually crumbled and fell to the floor with heavy clanging sounds. The wall, which was rated to withstand direct meteor impacts and small arms fire, had been damaged by a human's involuntary nasal explosion. For exactly 2.3 seconds, there was absolute silence in Conference Hall Epsilon. Everyone, and I mean everyone, was frozen in place, staring at the cracked wall. Then the alarm started. Klaxons blared. Red emergency lights began flashing. The station's automated safety system, detecting structural damage, immediately initiated lockdown protocols. Reinforced blast doors began sliding into place over the exits. A mechanical voice announced in 17 languages that there had been a hull integrity compromise and all personnel should proceed to emergency stations. That broke the spell. Chaos erupted. Board members scrambled for cover, diving under tables and behind chairs. The Thexian delegation, all 6 of them, scuttled toward the exits at top speed, their legs moving in a blur. One of the Valorian observers actually fainted, their crystalline body structure making a musical tinkling sound as they collapsed. Another representative activated a personal shield generator, the blue energy barrier snapping into place with a crackle. Krill, because the universe apparently has a sense of humor, looked directly at me and slowly shook his head. He did not say anything. He did not need to. His expression said it all. I told you so. And me? I just stood there, completely frozen. My manipulators hung limp at my sides. My ocular stalks had retracted slightly in an involuntary fear response. My brain was trying desperately to process what had just happened and failing spectacularly. Every piece of data I thought I knew about humans, about Earth, about Deathworld classification, was currently being rewritten in real time. "Oh no," Jackson Torres said, his voice cutting through the alarm noise. "Oh no, no. I am so sorry. Everyone, please, I am so sorry." He stood there in the middle of the chaos, looking absolutely mortified. His face had gone even redder, and he was staring at the cracked wall with genuine distress. He raised both hands in a placating gesture, still holding his tissue in one of them. "It was just a sneeze," he said desperately, as board members continued to panic around him. "I tried to warn you. I really did try to warn you. I am so sorry about the wall." The doors on the far side of the hall opened, and 2 more humans rushed in. They were wearing station security uniforms, and they must have been stationed nearby. They took one look at the cracked wall, then at Jackson, then at the panicking aliens, and their expressions shifted to something between understanding and resignation. "Jackson, buddy," the first human said. A woman with short blonde hair. "Did you sneeze indoors again?" "I tried to hold it," Jackson protested weakly. "I really tried, but it had been building for like 5 minutes and—" "It is okay," the second human, a tall man with dark skin and a completely calm demeanor, said soothingly. He pulled out his own tissue and handed it to Jackson. "Here, take this. Better out than in, right? Better out than in. Better out than in." The human had just cracked a reinforced wall with his face, and they were treating it like he had spilled a beverage. I think that was the moment I realized Krill had been right. Earth was not a Category 3 death world. It was not even Category 7. And I had absolutely no idea what I had gotten myself into. It took station maintenance approximately 12 minutes to shut off the alarms and convince the automated systems that we were not in fact experiencing a catastrophic hull breach. During those 12 minutes I watched Jackson Torres apologize to literally everyone in the room individually, looking more embarrassed with each apology. The 2 human security officers stayed close to him, occasionally patting his shoulder in what seemed to be a comforting gesture. When the klaxons finally stopped and the emergency lights returned to normal, the head of the review board, a dignified Peltraxian named Council Member Thex, cleared her throat appendage and spoke. "Perhaps," she said carefully, her voice translator adding a slight tremor that might have been actual nervousness. "Officer Torres could explain what exactly just happened. For the record." Jackson nodded miserably, dabbing at his nose one more time. "Of course, Council Member. Again, I apologize profusely. What you just witnessed was a standard human sneeze, which is an involuntary expulsion of air from the respiratory system, triggered by irritation in the nasal passages. In my case, the common cold virus has inflamed my sinuses, making sneezes more frequent and unfortunately more forceful." "Forceful," I heard myself say, my voice coming out much higher pitched than normal. "You call that forceful?" Jackson winced. "Well, yes. A typical human sneeze expels air at velocities between 140 and 160 kilometers per hour. The pressure involved can exceed 300 kilopascals in the thoracic cavity. It is actually impossible to keep our eyes open during a sneeze because of the pressure, which is why my eyes were closed when it happened. 160 kilometers per hour. He had just casually mentioned that humans routinely expelled air from their faces at speeds that would qualify as severe weather conditions on most civilized planets. "How often?" Krill asked, his voice very quiet and very controlled. "Do humans sneeze?" "Oh, it varies," Jackson said, seeming grateful for a straightforward question. "When we are healthy, maybe once or twice a day if we encounter allergens or irritants. When we have a cold like I do now, anywhere from 10 to 50 times per day, sometimes more. It depends on the severity of the infection. 50 times per day. 50 wall-cracking explosions per day. I felt my limbs go weak." The blonde security officer, whose name tag read Officer Chen, spoke up helpfully. "It is actually worse with coughs. Those can hit even higher velocities. And do not even get me started on what happens when someone vomits. We lost 3 toilet facilities last month because people forget to brace the fixtures before they get sick." "Wait," Council Member Thex said, her eye stalks extending fully in alarm. "Your involuntary biological functions regularly destroy your own infrastructure?" "Not regularly," the tall security officer whose tag identified him as Officer Adamala said reassuringly. Then he paused. "Well, I guess semi-regularly. We have maintenance crews on permanent standby for it. Sneezes, coughs, Sometimes someone falls down wrong and goes through a floor panel. Goes through a floor panel, I repeated numbly. Oh yeah, Jackson said, warming to the topic now that the acute embarrassment was fading. Tripping is actually one of our biggest problems on stations. See, on Earth when we trip we just catch ourselves. No big deal. But station floors are not made of Earth materials. They are lighter, designed for lower gravity species. So when a human trips and catches themselves, they sometimes dent the floor, or break through it, or accidentally rip a handrail off the wall. Officer Chen nodded enthusiastically. Last week someone stumbled in Section 7 and grabbed a door frame to steady themselves. Tore the whole frame out of the wall. The door, the frame, the support bolts, everything. Just ripped it clean out. The person felt terrible about it, Officer Adamula added. Filled out all the damage reports, very apologetic. It is just one of those things that happens. One of those things that happens. Casual structural destruction was just one of those things that happens. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. Council Member Thek said, and I could see her manipulators trembling slightly. Humans routinely, through normal daily activities and involuntary biological functions, cause significant property damage when we are not on Earth. Yes, Jackson admitted. At home, everything is built to withstand us, so it is not really an issue. But when we travel, we have to be very careful. We take classes before we are allowed on stations. They teach us to move slowly, to not grab things too hard, to suppress our sneezes when possible, to sit down gently. We really do try our best. You have to take classes, I said slowly, on how to not accidentally destroy things. Correct, Jackson said. It is mandatory for all humans before off-world travel. The failure rate is actually pretty low. Only about 15% of humans wash out of the program. Those individuals are restricted to Earth-standard facilities only. 15%. 15% of humans could not learn to control their own strength enough to safely interact with the rest of the galaxy. Krill scuttled over to where I stood, still frozen at the podium. He looked up at me with all 8 eyes, and his expression was the most vindictive I told you so I had ever witnessed from any species. Category 3, he said softly. Just loud enough for me to hear. Mild and overrated, you said. Harmless, you said. I could not even argue. My entire worldview was crumbling like that wall, fracturing into smaller and smaller pieces as each new revelation hit. Officer Chen was still talking, apparently feeling helpful. The worst is when someone forgets and stretches when they wake up. You know, that big morning stretch. We had an incident 2 months ago where someone did that in their quarters and put both hands through the ceiling and their feet through the floor. At the same time, just completely skewered their entire room like a piece of fruit. And that person was fine. Councilmember Thex asked weakly. Oh yeah, totally fine. Just embarrassed. And stuck for about 20 minutes until maintenance could cut them out. Jackson nodded along. That is why Earth human quarters have special reinforcement now. Command learned that lesson pretty quickly. We also have reinforced gym facilities, reinforced dining areas, and special door mechanisms that can handle us pulling or pushing too hard. It is all outlined in the Human Accommodation Requirements document. How long is that document? I heard myself ask. Jackson thought for a moment. The current version is about 470 pages, but that includes illustrations and safety protocols. 470 pages of special accommodations, just to prevent humans from accidentally destroying their environment through normal everyday activities. I looked down at my datapad, at my beautiful presentation about Earth being a Category 3 death world, at my perfect record and my confident assertions. Then I looked at the cracked wall, at the nervous board members, at Krill's knowing expression, and at Jackson Torres, who was just a regular average human dealing with a minor cold. I need to revise my classification, I said quietly. Yes, Krill said, still staring at me with those vindictive eyes. Yes, you do. The review board mercifully decided to postpone the official hearing until the wall could be repaired, and everyone's cardiovascular systems could return to normal operational levels. I retreated to my office immediately, clutching my datapad like it was the only solid thing left in a universe that had suddenly stopped making sense. My office was small, just a desk and a workstation, and walls covered in certifications and commendations from 17 cycles of perfect planetary classifications. I sat down heavily in my chair, pulled up my Earth assessment report, and stared at it. Category 3 Death World. Mild environmental challenges. Suitable for most species with minor adaptations. I deleted the entire thing. Then I started over. My manipulators flew across the datapad interface, typing frantically, pulling up every piece of data I had previously dismissed as irrelevant or exaggerated. Gravity readings that I had called reasonable were actually crushing by galactic standards. Atmospheric oxygen levels I had noted as adequate were borderline toxic to most species. The temperature swings I had labeled moderate would kill unprotected individuals from 70% of known civilizations within hours. And the humans. Oh, the humans. I created an entirely new section in the report titled Special Warnings Regarding Indigenous Sentient Species. I detailed the sneeze incident with clinical precision. I added notes about involuntary coughs, about casual property damage from trips and falls, about morning stretches that could punch through reinforced materials. I included the 470-page accommodation requirements document as a mandatory appendix. Then I changed the classification. Category 9 Deathworld, extreme hazard to all non-native species. Approach with maximum caution. Indigenous population capable of causing significant structural damage through involuntary biological functions. Special containment and reinforcement protocols required for all interactions. Category 9. The second highest rating possible, reserved for planets where simply existing was an act of defiance against a hostile universe. I had only issued 3 Category 9 classifications in my entire career, and those had been for planets with sentient predators and active volcanic super-eruptions. My perfect record was destroyed. 17 cycles of flawless assessments ended because I had been too arrogant to listen when Krill tried to warn me, too confident in my own expertise to see what the data was actually telling me. I submitted the revised report to the review board at 5th rotation. I did not wait for their response. I already knew what it would say. Instead, I went to the observation deck, a long corridor with transparent aluminum windows overlooking the docking bays. I needed to think, to process, to figure out how I had missed something so catastrophically obvious. That was where I was standing staring out at the stars when Jackson Torres walked past. He was heading toward the human transport ship, apparently cleared to return to Earth now that the hearing had been postponed. He saw me and gave a small apologetic wave. Again, "I am so sorry about earlier," he called out. "I really did try to warn everyone." "I know," I said quietly. "The fault was mine, not yours." He smiled, seeming relieved, and turned to continue down the corridor. He made it maybe 5 steps before his foot caught slightly on an uneven floor panel. Just a tiny stumble, barely noticeable. He caught himself instantly, his hand shooting out to brace against the wall. The metal floor panel where his foot had landed now had a visible dent in it. His hand pressing against the wall for just a fraction of a second had left an impression in the reinforced steel. Jackson did not even seem to notice. He just kept walking, humming something under his breath, completely unaware that he had just casually deformed solid metal through an act as simple as not falling down. I watched him disappear around the corner, then looked back at the dented floor panel. Earth was not mild. Earth was not overrated. Earth was a nightmare planet that had somehow produced a species so terrifyingly over-engineered for survival that they had to take classes on how to not accidentally break everything around them. And the worst part, the truly horrifying part, was that they were so good at holding back, so practiced at restraining their own capabilities, that they seemed harmless, gentle even, friendly. They were not harmless. They were apex predators playing at being civilized, and they were doing it so convincingly that idiots like me could not see the danger until a simple sneeze cracked a wall. I looked down at my datapad at the Category 9 classification, and I felt something that might have been relief. My record was ruined, yes. My reputation as an expert would take cycles to rebuild if it ever did, but I had learned something invaluable. Never, ever underestimate a Deathworlder, especially not the ones who apologize when they accidentally demonstrate exactly why their planet earned that classification. Somewhere in the station an alarm started blaring again. Probably another human had sneezed, or coughed, or tripped. I sighed and headed back to my office. I had a feeling I was going to be revising a lot more classifications in the near future, starting with my own understanding of what mild actually meant.